I love your setup, man. Look at that.
Hi, in the Chilkat Mountains, Dustin and Wes are cleaning up the gold from the last 2 weeks.
Keep stacking it up, man. Every little bit counts.
Yeah, it does.
Dustin Hurt took a risk no one else would. The canyon laughed at every miner who tried. Steep cliffs, falling rocks, raging water. Death was waiting in every corner. Most turned back. Most never came back at all. But Dustin went in anyway. No safety net, no backup. Just skill, just guts, just the belief that the canyon's treasure was his for the taking. Days turned into nights. Cold burned through him. Exhaustion weighed every step. Every move could end it. And still, he pressed on. He dug. He climbed. He fought. Then it happened. $50 million in gold, recovered from the deadly canyon. A fortune that legends said couldn't be claimed. Sweat, risk, and sheer will turned into victory. Hit that like button and subscribe. Because Dustin's story isn't just about gold. It's about courage. It's about danger. It's about taking the ultimate risk and winning. Dustin Hurt knew from the start that this wasn't going to be a normal season. He had gambled before. Weather, equipment, even the river itself. But nothing compared to the canyon that lay ahead of him. Locals called it the Devil's Throat, a name whispered with the same unease as a curse. It wasn't just another narrow valley carved by water over centuries. This was a place where the earth seemed alive, where the sound of rushing water never stopped echoing from wall to wall, a roar that shook the bones and carried stories of the men who never made it back out. On the maps, it was marked as a dead zone. Old surveyors had scribbled warnings in the margins. Unstable ground, dangerous currents, not worth the risk. But for Dustin, those warnings had the opposite effect. He had spent too many years chasing rumors of hidden gold, too many hours breaking his back against ordinary pay dirt. If there was even the smallest chance that the canyon held the kind of untouched fortune the old-timers spoke of, then turning away wasn't an option. He told his crew, straight out, "If we survive this canyon, we'll survive anything, and we'll come out with gold." The first steps down were slow and tense. The walls of the canyon seemed to close in tighter the deeper they went. The ground underfoot shifted constantly, a mess of slick boulders and loose gravel waiting to roll an ankle or worse. Every sound was amplified, boots scraping on stone, the groan of ropes, the constant hiss and crash of the river beneath them. Some of the men muttered about the last team that had tried to work this stretch of ground. They had brought in heavy gear, even dredges, but they never lasted more than a few weeks. What was left of their camp had been swallowed by a flood, and the machines that survived were twisted wrecks still rusting along the river's edge. Dustin pushed ahead anyway. He had read the journals left behind by miners from nearly a century ago, notes written in desperate handwriting that spoke about how the canyon seemed to swallow men whole. Those words could have scared him off, but instead they burned in his head like a challenge. He tightened his harness, checked his gear, and muttered to himself, "If this place doesn't kill us, it'll make us legends." The further they pushed into the canyon, the more it fought back. Machines were hauled in piece by piece, lowered on cables that strained and screamed against the weight. But even steel wasn't safe here. Excavators sank into the mud almost as soon as they touched the ground. Hydraulic systems froze, choked by grit and freezing spray. Pumps stalled as the current pushed silt into every line and joint. The canyon floor was alive, shifting like it wanted to bury them at the first opportunity. Then the rock slides started. Small at first, a scattering of stones, knocking helmets, clattering off the machines. But soon they came heavier, full sheets of gravel and debris shearing down the canyon walls without warning. The men had to scatter, leaving tools where they lay as tons of rock came crashing down. Each time, Dustin counted heads, waiting for the worst. Each time, they barely came out with everyone intact. The moment that nearly broke them came without warning. One of the main winch cables snapped, the sound like a rifle shot ricocheting through the canyon. A dredge, easily the size of a small house, swung violently, crashing into the air with enough force to smash anything in its path. For a breathless second, the crew froze, waiting for disaster. The machine missed them by inches, slammed into the canyon wall, and hung there, swaying like a giant pendulum. The men looked at Dustin, expecting him to call it off, to order a retreat before someone was crushed for good. But retreat wasn't in his nature. Supplies were thin. Equipment was breaking faster than they could fix it, and only 2 pumps still functioned. Anyone else would have called the season a failure already. Dustin saw it differently. Where others saw a death trap, he saw an opportunity no one else dared to touch. He gathered the crew around the campfire that night, faces lit by the flames, exhaustion written in the dirt, and sweat on their skin. "We came here for 2,000 ounces, he said, his voice carrying over the roar of the river. But that's not enough. If we're risking everything to be here, then it has to be worth it. We're raising the goal to 3,500. The men stared at him in silence, some with disbelief, others with quiet anger. It was insane. The canyon had nearly killed them already. But Dustin didn't flinch. He believed that the canyon was hiding more than just scattered flakes and traces. He believed that beneath the mud and stone, there was a motherlode that could change everything. And if that meant doubling the pressure, pushing every man and machine to the limit, then so be it. The decision hung heavy in the air. They all knew what it meant: longer hours, harder work, and no margin for mistakes. The canyon would test them, break them if it could. But they also knew that if Dustin was right, if there truly was a fortune hidden under their boots, then every cut, bruise, and close call would be worth it. The canyon was dangerous, maybe even cursed, but it was also a once-in-a-lifetime chance. So they stayed. They braced the machines, reinforced the cables, and prepared to go deeper into the devil's throat. The canyon wasn't finished with them yet, not by a long shot. But neither was Dustin finished with the canyon. Even as the crew steadied themselves, Dustin's mind raced. The canyon's roar drowned out everything else, yet he could sense the unseen spaces beneath the torrent, the secrets the water carried. He had to see what was hidden, even if it meant bending the rules of danger itself. Without a word, he signaled for something the crew had never tried in conditions like this. Submersible sonar drones, machines built for cave rescues and underwater mapping, were lowered into the violent water. At first, the current battered them so badly it seemed impossible they would last. But Dustin pushed them deeper, controlling the feeds as grainy images flickered on the screens. The canyon floor, long hidden by mud and rushing water, began to take shape in ghostly outlines. Then the first real shock appeared. The sonar showed a void beneath the riverbed, a collapsed tunnel branching away from the main channel. A tunnel the men had no idea existed. It wasn't just empty space. The scans revealed clusters of density beneath the rubble, shadows that hinted at mineral-rich rock sealed away under tons of stone and water. The shape was unnatural, too precise to be explained by ordinary erosion. Someone had been there before. Dustin spread the old journals across the camp table, weather-stained pages that spoke of an impossible gold drift deep under the canyon floor. For decades, no one had believed those words. Too dangerous, too unlikely, but now the screen in front of them showed proof. The The 3D map filled in detail after detail, sketching out a passage that curved like a vein through the earth, with pockets bright enough to suggest quartz, rich with gold. The men argued. Some called it suicide, trying to open a tunnel buried under that much pressure. Others stared at the map with wide eyes, seeing the same thing Dustin did. Fortune, the kind that rewrites lives. He cut through the noise with a simple statement. They weren't going after loose flakes in gravel. They weren't chasing dust in the rapids. They would open the tunnel. Whatever had stopped the miners before them, whatever had collapsed that shaft nearly a century ago, they would face it head-on. The plan was reckless, but it was also their only shot at something greater than survival. The next days were a blur of engineering, welding, and sheer determination. Steel cages were lowered into place, forming a skeletal exoskeleton around the canyon's weakest points. Anchors were drilled into jagged stone, beams bolted together to fight against the earth itself. The site transformed from a death trap into something that looked almost like a fortress. The river continued to rage, the ground shook with every rock slide, but little by little, a shaft opened into the hidden passage. It was a hole no one alive had seen since the early 1900s. When the descent finally began, the mood shifted. Helmets clicked on, headlamps cutting narrow cones of light into the dark throat of the tunnel. Every step was heavy, the air colder and wetter with each foot down. The shaft was alive with ghosts of the past, rusted lanterns clinging to rock, shovels bent and broken, corroded nails scattered like bones. Along one wall, initials carved into the damp stone, their edges blurred by time and moisture, told the silent story of the men who had once worked here and never come back. The tunnel plunged deeper than expected, over 100 feet straight into silence. The ground squelched under their boots, mud mixed with ice, and the weight of a century pressed down on their shoulders. Nobody spoke for long stretches. Only the echo of water dripping through unseen cracks filled the air. Finally, Dustin broke the silence with words barely above a whisper. "We're walking straight into someone else's unfinished dream." No one replied, but every man understood. They were trespassers in a place abandoned by history, finishing a job that had ended in failure for the men who started it. At the bottom of the shaft, the beam of a flashlight caught something unusual. Quartz veins, white and sharp against the black stone, shimmered faintly. At first it looked like frost, crystalline and delicate, but as the light shifted, flecks of gold flashed back. The sight held them frozen, caught between awe and disbelief. Visible gold, not microscopic dust, not fine powder, actual flecks glimmering right in the rock. One of the geologists crouched, brushing a hand over the streaks. His voice cracked when he spoke. "This is textbook bonanza. This is what legends are built on." The words set the crew in motion. A makeshift sluice was dragged into place, pieced together from the limited gear they could move underground. Men worked knee-deep in freezing black water, feeding rock and sediment through by hand, their breath fogging in the cold air. The rhythm was frantic. Shovel, dump, wash, repeat, every man driven by the knowledge of what shimmered in those walls. Hours bled together until the first clean-up tray was lifted, heavy and wet. The gold sat in it like fire against the steel. 52 ounces in a single pass, nearly $100,000 at today's price, pulled out in less than a day's effort. The crew erupted, shouts echoing so loud the tunnel seemed to shake. After all the danger, all the equipment lost, and near misses, they were finally looking at proof that the canyon wasn't just curse and myth. It was real, and it was richer than any of them had dared to say aloud. Exhaustion gave way to adrenaline as they pressed on, feeding more rock into the sluice, every pan heavier than the last. No one wanted to stop. The canyon had tried to bury them, drown them, starve them out, but now it was yielding treasure. For the first time since setting foot in the Devil's Throat, the men believed they might actually walk away, not just alive, but triumphant. Fueled by that belief, they pushed harder than ever, refusing to let fatigue dictate their pace. Days blurred into nights, the rhythm of digging, hauling, and washing becoming almost hypnotic. For 3 relentless days, the crew ran their makeshift sluices without pause. Buckets clanged, pumps groaned, shovels scraped against rock, and still they pressed on. Every pan grew heavier than the last, every tray catching more gold than seemed possible. When the tally finally came in, the numbers stunned even Dustin. Over 2,000 ounces had been pulled in less than 72 hours. At market value, the haul crossed $10 million before anyone had time to breathe. The men celebrated, but only for a heartbeat. The canyon refused to let them enjoy their success. Generators strained and finally gave out, sputtering to silence one after another. Without them, the entire operation threatened to grind to a halt. Instead of surrendering, they improvised. Hand-crank pumps were dragged into place, men throwing their backs into the work as icy water surged past. Every turn of the crank kept the sluices alive, kept the miracle flowing. By the second night, exhaustion was etched into every face. Fingers bled, boots filled with icy water, muscles burned from overwork, but Dustin wouldn't allow retreat. "You don't walk away from a miracle," he told them, his voice hoarse but unshaken. The canyon seemed to sense what was happening, as if it hated the thought of giving up its secrets. Storms rolled through, sheets of rain pounding the ground until slides roared down the walls in violent cascades. Rocks shifted underfoot, boulders tumbled without warning, and the river itself surged like it wanted to drown every last man in its path. Each moment tested their resolve, but the gold flowing out of the sluice boxes drove them onward. By the 4th day, Dustin ordered more scans. If they had struck this much gold in such a short span, he wanted to know exactly what they were standing on. The results nearly stopped his heart. The quartz vein that had given them their first glimpse of fortune didn't end a few yards into the shaft. It stretched. The scans traced it running under the canyon floor for over a mile, uninterrupted, a glowing artery beneath the stone. Core drilling confirmed the impossible. Every sample came back strong, gold running thick and consistent, the purity steady across the entire vein. The geologists compared it to a river frozen in stone, a natural treasure vault carved by time itself. If they mined the whole vein, the estimates put the yield at $50 million or more, enough to crown this canyon as one of the richest single finds in Alaska's modern history. The crew, exhausted and battered, found new energy in the discovery. They gave the vein a name, the canyon's heart. The words spread through camp like wildfire, whispered with reverence, half in disbelief, half in awe. What had once been called the Devil's Throat, cursed ground where men vanished and machines were destroyed, now had a second identity, one that spoke of fortune and rebirth. For Dustin, it was vindication. Years of risk, years of chasing impossible claims, all came to this. He declared the canyon the richest claim he had ever touched. And for the first time, the men began to believe they might not only meet his impossible goal, but shatter it. Yet fortune never comes without a shadow. Word traveled fast, faster than Dustin could have imagined. Other miners began to swarm the ridges, overlooking the canyon, setting up camps of their own. Some came with legitimate claims nearby. Others came with no paperwork at all, only ambition and greed. Rumors spread through town bars and along CB radios. Claim jumpers were circling, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The gold had drawn them like blood draws sharks. Then came the regulators. State officials appeared unannounced, descending into the canyon with clipboards and hard hats, demanding permits, safety reports, and documentation. They walked among the machines, eyeing every cable and pump, asking sharp questions about environmental impact. It was the worst possible moment. The crew already stretched thin, their defenses fraying. Dustin's lawyers scrambled, pulling late nights to lock down the mineral rights before any loophole could be exploited. Paperwork flew back and forth, stamped and counter-stamped, while in the canyon below, the men kept shoveling. The fight had shifted. It was no longer just a battle against stone, water, and exhaustion. It was a battle on every front. Against rivals circling like vultures, against regulators questioning their every move, against whispers of armed raiders ready to come under the cover of night. The canyon was no longer just a dig site. It had become a fortress under siege. And Dustin found himself at the center of it, guarding not only gold, but the legacy of every man who had risked his life to stand there. But the pressure didn't stop at the canyon walls. Every external threat seeped into the minds of the crew, coloring their glances, sharpening their tempers. With only 150 ounces left to hit the 3,500-ounce target, the adrenaline that had carried them through endless shifts began to crack, replaced by raw paranoia. Every glance at the sluice box, every pan weighed on the scales, carried the weight of expectation. Men who had once laughed over coffee now snapped at each other over small mistakes. The gold was close enough to taste, yet that nearness gnawed at morale. Instead of relief, it bred suspicion. Each man wondering if fate itself would snatch the finish line away at the last possible second. The canyon seemed to conspire against them. A sudden surge of water tore through their access shaft, ripping away timber supports and swallowing tools, fuel drums, and supply caches in its path. When the waters receded, a twisted wreck remained, mud and debris choking the lifeline they had fought so hard to carve into the earth. Machines sat stranded, their tanks dry. Men cursed as they clawed through the muck, retrieving what they could. The disaster landed like a hammer blow, a reminder that no amount of planning could tame the canyon's fury. Then came the injuries. Frostbite crept into fingers and toes that had been wet too long in icy boots. Dehydration set in as men worked past the point of exhaustion, their bodies wrung dry by constant effort. Some collapsed outright, dragged from the dig face by their comrades, eyes hollow with fatigue. The medical kit emptied faster than they could refill it, every bandage and vial stretched beyond its purpose. For the first time, whispers of quitting echoed through the camp. But outside the canyon, the world was listening. Rumors of the canyon motherlode spread across markets, investors, and headlines. Gold prices ticked upward with each retelling of the strike. For global traders, it was a story of supply and demand. For Dustin's crew, it was fuel to push forward. The canyon had become more than a mine. It was a symbol, its riches already moving the gears of economies far from the Alaskan wilderness. In the midst of collapse, Dustin refused to retreat. He dropped his title of boss and took up a shovel himself, leading a rescue dig to clear the ruined shaft. His gloves bled mud, his back strained, but he matched every man's effort, proving leadership in the only way that mattered, by sharing the pain. His voice, ragged but unyielding, cut through the gloom. They hadn't bled this long to walk away now. That determination rekindled something in the others. If he wouldn't quit, neither would they. By the time the tally crossed the threshold, Dustin had become more than just a miner. His name joined the lore of modern gold rush icons, a figure whose story carried weight beyond ounces and dollars. Analysts across the industry declared his canyon strike the last great frontier discovery, a find that belonged in the same breath as the Klondike and Nome. He had done what few thought possible, turned a cursed gorge into a vault of unimaginable wealth. The shadow of his father hung heavy in the celebration. Dakota Fred had warned him long ago, the canyon will take more than it gives. And in many ways, the old man had been right. Dustin had watched friends stagger on the edge of collapse, had seen lives risked and nearly lost. Yet, standing on the pile of gold they had clawed from the stone, he had also proven the warning incomplete. The canyon gave back more than anyone dreamed possible. It had devoured strength, yes, but in return, it had crowned him with legend. The site itself took on a life of its own. People spoke of it in half-whispers, half-myths, a place as dangerous as it was rewarding. Stories of storms, collapses, and near-deaths spread just as quickly as tales of unimaginable fortune. The canyon was no longer just geography. It was a legend, half cautionary tale, half promise of riches that would live long after the last ounce was hauled away. And still, the earth groaned and rumbled, as if keeping back secrets not yet revealed. When the dust settled, the final tally shocked even the boldest predictions: $50 million in recovered gold. No single number could capture the blood, frost, and fear that went into that sum, but it stood nonetheless, cold and undeniable, written into the books of mining history. The outside world descended almost instantly. Media crews hauled cameras and lights into the canyon, eager to capture the man who had defied both nature and expectation. Investors lined up with contracts in hand, their eyes glittering as brightly as the gold itself. Foreign buyers offered staggering sums for access to future digs. In a matter of weeks, the isolated canyon transformed into a stage, every corner lit by attention. And yet Dustin himself remained quiet. He had no grand speeches, no boasts. When asked what the fortune meant, he gave only a few words. Gold doesn't come easy. You fight for it. You bleed for it. His silence spoke more than any interview could. To him, the gold was not just wealth. It was proof of survival, of endurance in a place designed to break men. The canyon itself would never be the same. Once a death trap whispered about in mining circles, it had become a modern legend, a crown jewel in the story of the gold rush era reborn. But legends are never simple, never safe. For every ounce carried away, questions lingered. Had Dustin uncovered the fortune he sought, or had he awakened something older, something that would never rest again? The roar of the canyon, echoing through its stone walls, seemed to suggest the latter, a sound that was equal parts triumph and warning, as if the land itself refused to be silenced. If you loved this epic canyon strike, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next adventure.